The US president says his meeting with the Turkish president was great following their bilateral talks at the White House. Hello and welcome to TRT World, coming to you live from Istanbul. I'm Per Nyberg. Also coming up, Israeli forces killed more than 20 Palestinians on Friday morning as hundreds of thousands flee the intense bombardments in Gaza City. Donald Trump says he won't allow Israel to annex the occupied West Bank. He's also confident that a ceasefire in Gaza is pretty close. And the Department of Justice charges the former director of the FBI, James Comey, of 2 felonies, alleging he lied to Congress in 2020. US President Donald Trump has hosted Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan at the White House. President Trump told reporters he had a great meeting with President Erdogan, adding that it was very conclusive on many issues. The 2 leaders discussed Turkey's long-disputed F-35 fighter jet deal, trade and energy ties, as well as regional matters. TRT World's Kübra Akkoç reports from the White House.
A warm welcome by US President Donald Trump to Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan at the White House.
It's an honor to have him.
Then a very friendly meeting in the Oval Office.
He does an amazing job in his country. And we've had tremendous relationships, both having to do with war and having to do with trade.
On the agenda of 2 NATO allies were defense and trade ties.
As Mr. Trump said, I believe we will have the opportunity today to thoroughly discuss our relations concerning both the F-35 and F-16 issues.
Vice President.
From Syria to Ukraine, the regional flashpoints also dominated the meeting.
How do you see a joint initiative with President Erdogan to bring the President of Russia, Putin, and President Zelensky to the negotiating table?
Well, I can tell you that President Erdogan is very respected by both of them. Everybody respects Erdogan. They really respect Erdogan. I do. And I think he could have a big influence if he wants to. Right now, he's very neutral. He likes being neutral. So do I like being neutral.
Joining the meeting, the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, Tom Barak, told us President Erdogan's visit to the White House was epic. And he added that the country is aligned when it comes to addressing Turkey's legitimate security concerns on its border with Syria.
Is to make it a regional decision. It's really between everybody else. So we're ushering, we're helping. SDF coming on board into the Syrian integrated regime is important. And we had a discussion. Our interests are 100% aligned, including with SDF, is we're all running to find a pattern and a program that matches with this March 10th agreement that they've already made.
Shortly after the meeting, Turkey's energy minister confirmed the 2 countries had signed a deal to deepen their partnership in nuclear energy.
Today to sign
That positive outlook was echoed by Trump's first reaction.
We had a great meeting with Turkey and their very respected president.
The coming weeks will show whether the constructive dialogue between the 2 leaders will translate into lasting policy. President Erdogan has wrapped up his U.S. trip after a major address to the UNGA, diplomatic engagements, and a White House visit, which the U.S. president later called great. President Trump and President Erdogan held a warm, cordial meeting, showcasing a growing partnership in many fields. Kübra Akkoç, TRT World, Washington.
And during his return from the U.S., Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan called for an immediate end to the massacres in Gaza. He also stressed the importance of peace in Syria and pointed out Israel's growing isolation on the world stage. Erdogan also described his meeting with President Trump as being extremely positive, promising a boost to Turkish-American relations in both trade and global issues.
We have maintained strong ties with Mr. Trump, which I believe will benefit Turkish-US relations. We discussed trade and investment, the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, as well as Syria. Mr. Trump called for an end to the fighting and a path to lasting peace. Turkey urged an immediate ceasefire and said a two-state solution is the only durable formula, a view Mr. Trump acknowledged. The Palestinian cause is now much more widely known than it was before. Is there anyone still standing by Israel apart from a handful of countries? We speak out for the children of Gaza, for the honor of Jerusalem, and for the dignity of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Those responsible for so many massacres, acts of genocide, and human rights violations will be held accountable both in the eyes of the law and in the eyes of history. In my 13 years of attending UN meetings, I've never seen a summit like this. Chaired by Macron and attended by the Saudi representative, the energy and participation were unprecedented. States expressing their will to recognize Palestine sent a powerful message. Justice lives on, and conscience will not be silenced. Now they must follow through with full diplomatic recognition and stand with the oppressed. Together, God willing, we will help free Palestine from this cruelty. This year, Syria's participation in the United Nations General Assembly was extremely important for the international legitimacy of the Syrian government. The recovery of Syria's economy and infrastructure is also very important. We always emphasize the importance of Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The international community must also take steps for peace and stability in Syria. It should avoid activities that encourage terrorist organizations in the region. We particularly place great importance on the lifting of sanctions against Syria.
And joining us live now is TRT World's diplomatic correspondent Hassan Abdullah, live for us in Ankara. Hassan, what's your analysis of what we just heard there from the Turkish president?
Well, when you listen to the speech of the president and when you talk to officials here in the government in Ankara, there is this sense of achievement and also a lot of optimism at the moment. Sense of achievement because they're saying that, especially when it comes to the issue of Gaza, Turkey, they say, has been playing an instrumental role in internationalizing what's happening in Gaza and what's happening in other Palestinian territories. And they believe that it's this Turkish effort that has basically encouraged many countries to formally recognize the state of Palestine and also set the course, set this momentum, where the president earlier said that hopefully other countries are going to follow suit. Now that there has been this formal recognition, there's going to be, in the next stage, talk about what's going to constitute the Palestinian territories, the state of Palestine. Basically, the Turkish position is that it's going to be the territory before the 1967 Israeli military action and aggression. So that, of course, is going to be the next challenge that Ankara says it's working towards. There's also, of course, the bilateral dimension. The Turkish side believes that the meeting with US President was very instrumental, and they're hoping that when it comes to defense cooperation, when it comes to bilateral trade, this is where they're also expecting some major developments to show in the coming weeks and months.
Now, Trump indicated that there might be some major announcements to come after this meeting with Erdogan. What do we know about the next steps here when it comes to further cooperation between these two countries?
Well, this is actually in two main areas. So we can basically talk about the bilateral dimension and then the international or regional dimension. Bilaterally, we are expecting progress on the F-16 acquisition by Turkey. We're also expecting some developments on the F-35 program in the coming weeks. And also in other areas of defense cooperation, we understand that the two sides have had some constructive dialogue. Then, of course, there's the trade dimension. They've extensively talked about the specific measures they need to take to reach that target of $1 billion of trade volume. This is where the Turkish side is saying that there has been some development. They've talked about some of the specifics, including some of the hindrances to achieving that target. They've talked about that, and it seems that they've managed to iron out some of those obstacles. Then, of course, there's the regional dimension, especially when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. We've heard US President Trump say that President Erdogan is in a very strong position to mediate. He's trusted by the warring parties, Russia and Ukraine. So in that regard, there's this expectation in Washington that Turkey is going to be playing a role that will hopefully reach a point where Russia and Ukraine are going to be able to sit down and work out a political solution. So it's multi-layered and several dimensions that the two are hinting at.
Indeed. Hassan Abdullah, line for us in Ankara. Thank you so much, Hassan. Now, let's discuss this further with Mehmet Çelik. He is an editorial coordinator at the Daily Sabah. Very good to have you on the program, sir. How successful would you say that this meeting was between Erdogan and Trump?
Well, I think that success was visible at several levels. First of all, I mean, very symbolically, when we look at how Trump received Mr. Erdogan and how, I mean, it was so positive even in the pre-meeting press conference, that was, I think, a very good reflection of the positive welcome of Mr. Erdogan at White House. But secondly, and most importantly, I think this meeting had a very specific agenda and very specific topics to be talked about, to iron out some of the differences or overcome some of the obstacles in strengthening the bilateral ties. And this was definitely not a courtesy visit. So it had a very targeted aim when it comes to F-16s, F-35s, the bilateral trade, as well as some of the very important regional matters like Ukraine, Syria, and the catastrophe in Palestine, in Gaza. So when it comes to whether this meeting pinpointedly targeted these issues, I think was very successful. The outcome and the details about the results, of course, to be seen in the coming days. But I think the tone of the atmosphere and the tone of the meeting was a good reflection that this was a very successful meeting. Even in the statements that were shared with the media afterwards by both Turkey and the United States, I think it will translate into some tangible results, especially on the defense industry related matters, but more regionally, and I think more significantly also in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And hopefully, I think the Turkey's mobilization of the international community, international public opinion, and also, I mean, the fact that a big focus of the UNGA was allocated to Gaza, and that was a momentum there. Hopefully that will translate into some sort of maybe a ceasefire or some new developments, positive developments on the Gaza issue as well.
So let's talk some more about these international issues. Ukraine, for example, you mentioned that. I mean, there have already been negotiations between Russia and Ukraine right here in Istanbul. Do you think there's the possibility now of a meeting between the four presidents from Russia and Ukraine together with the US and Turkey here?
I mean, that's a very good question, and it's very hard to answer. Previously, I mean, two or three times they met in Istanbul, and very earlier time they had met in Antalya. But when it comes to bringing Mr. Putin to Turkey to meet Zelensky, I think that's where the difficulty is, because for Vladimir Putin, Mr. Zelensky is not a legitimate leader, and if the United States is able to put pressure on both sides or influence on both sides, of course, Turkey is a very neutral place for that meeting. And Turkey has voiced that willingness to host a meeting, to at least establish some sort of dialogue platform, leader-to-leader dialogue. And that ultimately could be serving for the interest of a peace in the long term. But the difficulty is not whether, I mean, Mr. Zelensky has already voiced his willingness to come to Turkey. He has already come to Turkey waiting for Vladimir Putin. But whether that will actually materialize, it is not as easy as holding some diplomatic meetings as Turkey hosted them previously by delegations from both sides. But I mean, of course, when Donald Trump is pushing for something, it's sometimes he makes it happen, and hopefully, if that leader-to-leader meeting takes place, I think it will be a good positive step towards a permanent peace or a ceasefire, at least in the Ukraine conflict.
Yeah. And Gaza was, of course, also top of the agenda, both during that meeting at the White House and also at the UN. I mean, Erdogan, he's been extremely critical of Netanyahu, but if you look at Trump, he's probably Netanyahu's main backer. How close are the US and Turkey when it comes to their sort of visions of what to do about Gaza?
I think for Donald Trump, I mean, Gaza issue is separate than the U.S. foreign policy of Israel. And why I separate them is because, of course, the ultimate plan for Israel is to expand the occupation and expand the attacks and aggressiveness to the wider region. But is that really something that Donald Trump specifically as a U.S. president wants? I'm not sure about that. So there is that discrepancy between Netanyahu's plans and his method of this expansion and how Donald Trump wants to be seen, or how he wants to portray himself as the peacemaker. So there's that discrepancy. But when it comes to the U.S. and Turkey, whether they align on Gaza, of course, I mean, United States is the main backer of this genocide and the main actor supporting Israel politically, economically, and militarily is the United States. So their position is like black and white, of course. But to limit Netanyahu, I think Trump will need to use some of his influence, and whether that can be successful or not will also depend on the pro-Israel lobby in the United States and how they want to draw perimeters around Donald Trump, and whether Donald Trump will have a maneuvering area or his influence will be stronger than theirs when it comes to limiting Netanyahu's actions. I mean, previously he said he told Netanyahu to be reasonable in Syria, but despite that message, Netanyahu went and attacked Damascus. They tried to carry out different attacks in really deeper inside Syria, let alone on the occupation in Golan Heights.
Mehmet Çelik, always good to have you on the program and hear your analysis. Thank you so much.
Thank you.